Imagine this. You're lying in bed at 2:47 a.m., the blue glow of your phone illuminating your face in the darkness. Your thumb scrolls with mechanical precision, image after image, body after body, face after face. You tell yourself you're looking for something specific, something that will satisfy this gnawing hunger inside you. But here's the paradox that will haunt you. The more you find what you think you're searching for, the emptier you become. You've convinced yourself this is desire. Pure, biological, undeniable desire. Everyone has it. Everyone feeds it. It's natural, harmless, just a release valve for the pressures of modern life. But what if I told you that what you think is lust, that burning, consuming, relentless craving, is actually the most sophisticated form of self-deception your psyche has ever constructed? But here's what I need you to understand before we go any deeper. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see every craving, every late-night scroll, every moment of desire you've ever experienced. Jung discovered something so profound about human nature that most people spend their entire lives running from this truth. If you're not ready to question everything you think you know about yourself, stop watching now. But if you're brave enough to see what's really driving you, if you want to understand why that emptiness returns no matter how much you feed it, then stay with me until the very end. Because by the time we're finished, you'll never mistake lust for what you actually need ever again. Picture this moment of brutal honesty. You finish, and for exactly 3 seconds, there's silence. Not peace, silence. A hollow, echoing void where satisfaction should be. Your heart isn't racing from pleasure. It's racing from the sudden, terrifying realization that you've been running from something you can't even name. The screen goes black, and in that reflection, you see not a satisfied person, but a stranger who has been systematically medicating an emptiness so profound that it has learned to disguise itself as its opposite. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to map the darkest territories of the human psyche, understood something that would make most people uncomfortable. What we call lust is rarely about the body we're pursuing. It's about the soul we've abandoned. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And nowhere is this more evident than in our relationship with desire itself." But here's where it gets disturbing. You're not just avoiding your soul, you're systematically dismantling it. Every time you reach for that phone, every time you scroll past reality into fantasy, every time you choose the simulation over the genuine article, you're making a trade. You're exchanging pieces of your authentic self for moments of synthetic aliveness. And the transaction is so subtle, so pleasurable in the moment, that you don't realize you're bankrupting your own spirit. Think about the last time you felt truly alive, not stimulated, not distracted, but genuinely alive. Can you remember? Because here's the terrifying truth. That hunger you're feeding isn't asking for more bodies, more images, more variety. It's screaming for more life. It's the cry of a soul that has been starved of meaning, connection, and authentic presence for so long that it has forgotten how to ask for what it actually needs. You see, lust in its corrupted form isn't the problem, it's the symptom. It's your psyche's desperate attempt to feel something, anything, in a world where you've become numb to your own existence. But here's the cruel irony. The very thing you're using to feel alive is the thing that's slowly killing your capacity to be alive. Jung called this the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the aspects of our being that we've pushed so far into the unconscious that they begin to operate independently, driving our behavior from beneath the threshold of awareness. And your shadow isn't the dark sexual thoughts you have. Your shadow is the profound loneliness, the deep disconnection, the existential emptiness that you've been running from for so long that you've forgotten it's there. What if the very thing you think is saving you from boredom, from pain, from the ache of ordinary existence, is actually the prison you've built to avoid confronting the most important question of your life? Who are you when no one is watching, when nothing is stimulating you, when you're left alone with the raw, unfiltered reality of your own being? Before we dive into this psychological rabbit hole that will shatter everything you thought you knew about desire, do me one favor. If you're someone who craves real truth over comfortable lies, if you're tired of surface-level content that doesn't actually change anything, then hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is for people who aren't afraid to confront the darkest corners of human psychology. And if this video ends up revealing something about yourself that you never saw before, then smash that like button, because it means you're ready to join the few who choose uncomfortable growth over pleasant stagnation. The insights we're about to explore don't just entertain, they transform. So subscribe now, because once you see what Jung really discovered about the human shadow, you'll want to go deeper into the psychological truths that most people will never encounter. The problem didn't begin with your first late-night scroll or your first fantasy. It began the moment you learned that your authentic emotions were inconvenient, that your natural need for connection was too much, that the raw intensity of your inner world had to be managed, controlled, and ultimately suppressed. Jung understood that what we call civilization is often just a sophisticated system of emotional exile. From childhood, you were taught to disconnect from the parts of yourself that felt too much, needed too much, or demanded too much attention. Your Anima, Jung's term for the inner feminine principle that governs feeling, intuition, and soul connection, was gradually pushed into the unconscious because it didn't fit the performance-based reality you were expected to inhabit. Think about it. When did you last cry without judgment? When did you last feel your emotions without immediately trying to fix, analyze, or escape them? When did you last sit with longing without rushing to satisfy it? If you can't remember, then you've successfully completed the modern project of self-abandonment. And lust, in its compulsive form, is simply your psyche's attempt to find a back door into the feelings you've locked away. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this when he spoke of the death of God not as a theological statement but as a psychological prophecy. He saw that as we systematically killed our connection to the sacred, to meaning, to the transcendent dimensions of existence, we would be left with what he called the last man, beings who seek only comfort, stimulation, and the path of least resistance. Your late-night scrolling isn't just personal weakness. It's the inevitable outcome of a culture that has severed itself from soul. But Jung went deeper than Nietzsche. He recognized that this disconnection creates what he termed complexes, autonomous psychological fragments that operate below conscious awareness, driving behavior with compulsive force. Your lust isn't you choosing pleasure. It's a complex choosing for you. A psychological pattern that has become so entrenched it feels like identity itself. Here's where it becomes genuinely disturbing. Every time you reach for external stimulation, instead of facing internal emptiness, you strengthen this complex. You train your nervous system to associate aliveness with consumption rather than presence. You teach your brain that the solution to disconnection is more disconnection, that the cure for numbness is more numbing. Arthur Schopenhauer called this the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that drives us toward satisfaction that never comes. But what he didn't fully grasp is that this will becomes perverted when it's cut off from genuine connection. It transforms from natural vitality into what we might call will to escape, a compulsive drive away from ourselves, rather than toward authentic fulfillment. The philosophical roots run even deeper. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the human tendency to deny our freedom and responsibility by pretending we have no choice. Every time you tell yourself, "I can't help it," or "this is just how I am," you're engaging in bad faith. You're choosing to see yourself as victim of your desires rather than author of your responses. But Jung's insight cuts through all philosophical abstractions with surgical precision. You're not addicted to sex, images, or fantasy. You're addicted to the temporary relief from existential anxiety that comes from not having to be fully present with your own life. The problem isn't your sexuality, it's your relationship with reality itself. This is why willpower fails, why resolutions crumble, why shame only makes it worse. You're trying to solve a spiritual crisis with behavioral modifications. You're attempting to heal soul sickness with surface-level strategies. But the wound isn't in your actions, it's in the fundamental split between who you are and who you've learned to perform being. The hidden problem is that you've been taught to mistake intensity for intimacy, stimulation for satisfaction, and escape for freedom. And now, as the complex tightens its grip, you're discovering that the very thing you thought would save you from emptiness has become the primary mechanism through which emptiness maintains its hold. What you don't realize is happening behind the scenes of your consciousness is far more sinister than any momentary guilt or shame you might feel. Your brain is being systematically rewired, not just neurologically, but existentially. Each time you choose simulation over reality, you're not just satisfying a craving, you're training your entire being to prefer the artificial to the authentic. The first casualty is your attention itself. Neuroscientist Dr. Anna Lemke's research on dopamine reveals that your brain's reward system becomes hijacked by supernormal stimuli experiences so intense and immediate that normal life begins to feel inadequate by comparison. But Jung anticipated this decades before modern neuroscience existed. He understood that when we feed the shadow through compulsive behaviors, we don't just strengthen the compulsion, we weaken our capacity for what he called active imagination, the ability to engage creatively and meaningfully with our inner world. Think about this. When was the last time you could sit through boredom without reaching for your phone? When did you last feel excited about something that required patience, effort, or delayed gratification? Your tolerance for the ordinary textures of existence, waiting, wondering, working through discomfort, has been systematically eroded. You've inadvertently trained yourself to need escalating levels of stimulation just to feel baseline normal. But the consequences extend far beyond personal comfort. Your capacity for genuine intimacy begins to atrophy. Jung wrote extensively about projection, the unconscious tendency to see in others what we cannot integrate in ourselves. When you're compulsively seeking external sources of aliveness, you stop being able to generate it from within. This means that everyone you meet becomes a potential source of the energy you can no longer create for yourself. You start seeing people as objects of utility rather than subjects of mystery. The woman across from you at dinner isn't a complex being with her own inner world. She's a potential source of the feeling you've forgotten how to access independently. Your relationships become transactions rather than explorations, performances rather than revelations. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. Your creative life force begins to die. Jung believed that libido life energy itself could be transformed into either compulsive seeking or creative expression. Every time you choose the compulsive path, you rob yourself of the energy needed for genuine creation. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and visionaries throughout history have understood this intuitively, that sexual energy and creative energy spring from the same well. And how you direct this force determines whether you become a creator or a consumer. The cultural implications are staggering. We're witnessing the emergence of what sociologists call intimacy recession, declining rates of romantic relationships, sexual satisfaction, and emotional connection across entire generations. But this isn't just about changing social norms. It's about the systematic destruction of our capacity for what Jung called psychic life, the rich, complex inner world where meaning, connection, and authentic desire actually originate. You're living in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han terms the burnout society, a culture so focused on performance, productivity, and instant gratification that we've lost touch with the contemplative dimensions of existence where real satisfaction emerges. Your compulsive seeking isn't a personal failure. It's a predictable response to a world that has made authentic being nearly impossible. But perhaps most tragic of all is the cognitive bias known as hedonic adaptation, your brain's tendency to return to baseline happiness despite positive or negative events. This means that each escalation in stimulation provides diminishing returns, requiring ever more intense experiences to achieve the same fleeting sense of aliveness. You become trapped in what addiction specialists call the hedonic treadmill, running faster and faster toward a satisfaction that retreats with every step. The ultimate consequence is existential. You begin to forget what you actually want. Beneath all the seeking, scrolling, and consuming, there's a person with genuine desires, authentic longings, and real needs for connection and meaning. But that person becomes increasingly buried under layers of artificial stimulation until you can no longer distinguish between what you truly want and what you've been conditioned to crave. Jung called this psychic possession when complexes become so powerful that they begin to live your life for you. You're no longer making conscious choices about your sexuality, your relationships, or your attention. Something else is choosing, and you're just along for the ride, wondering why nothing ever feels quite real anymore. The rebellion begins with a single radical act that goes against everything your conditioned mind believes about satisfaction. You stay, not with the craving, not with the fantasy, not with the endless scroll. You stay with yourself. In the moment when every fiber of your being is screaming for external stimulation, you make the most counterintuitive choice possible. You turn inward. Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites, the ability to remain present with contradictory forces without collapsing into compulsive action. But this isn't passive resignation. It's active rebellion against the tyranny of immediate gratification. When that familiar hunger arises, instead of feeding it, you ask it the question it's been waiting decades for someone to ask, "What are you really trying to tell me?" Here's what the mystics, philosophers, and depth psychologists have known for centuries, but modern culture has forgotten. The energy you've been directing outward in compulsive seeking is the same energy that can be transmuted into conscious creation. The fire of desire, when not immediately discharged through consumption, becomes the fuel for psychological transformation. This is what the ancient Taoist masters called turning the light around, redirecting the life force that's been scattered through endless, seeking back into the cultivation of inner awareness. They understood that sexual energy and spiritual energy are not opposites, but different expressions of the same fundamental vitality. When you stop leaking this energy through compulsive outlets, it begins to accumulate and transform into something far more powerful, presence itself. But Jung's approach was even more radical. He didn't advocate for repression or spiritual bypassing. Instead, he developed what he called active imagination, a practice of conscious dialogue with the unconscious forces that have been driving your behavior. You don't fight the shadow, you befriend it. You don't shame the craving, you get curious about it. Picture this revolutionary approach. The next time you feel that familiar pull, instead of either indulging it or suppressing it, you sit down and have a conversation with it. You ask, "What part of me are you representing? What need are you trying to meet? What would happen if I gave you what you're actually asking for instead of what you think you want?" This is how Carl Jung himself broke free from his own psychological complexes. During his famous Red Book period, 6 years of voluntary psychological descent, he learned to dialogue with the autonomous parts of his psyche rather than being unconsciously driven by them. He discovered that what we call symptoms are actually attempts at self-healing, misdirected expressions of our deepest needs for wholeness and integration. The historical examples are stunning. Nikola Tesla channeled his sexual energy into scientific innovation, claiming celibacy enhanced his creative powers. Gandhi called it brahmacharya, not sexual repression, but the conscious transformation of life force into service and spiritual development. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and philosophers like Kierkegaard understood intuitively what Jung later systematized, that the same energy driving compulsive seeking could be redirected into conscious creation. But here's the most counterintuitive part of the rebellion. You don't try to eliminate desire. You learn to desire more consciously. Instead of wanting what everyone else wants, you develop the courage to want what your soul actually craves. And your soul, Jung discovered, craves meaning, beauty, connection, and the experience of being authentically seen and met. This requires what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you've been conditioned to perform being. It means reclaiming the parts of yourself that were rejected, neglected, or pushed into the unconscious during your adaptation to social expectations. The practical rebellion looks like this. You start creating instead of consuming. You write, even if no one reads it. You build something with your hands. You sit in nature without your phone. You have conversations that go beneath the surface. You learn to tolerate boredom, to welcome solitude, to find entertainment in your own thoughts and feelings rather than external stimulation. Most radically of all, you begin to relate to your own sexuality as sacred rather than shameful, as creative force rather than compulsive need. You discover that the same energy that's been driving you toward endless seeking can become the foundation for the most profound intimacy, first with yourself, then with others who are also willing to meet life with presence rather than performance. The rebellion isn't against sexuality itself. It's against the unconscious, compulsive, disconnected expression of life force. It's choosing conscious desire over unconscious craving, authentic connection over artificial stimulation, and the long path of becoming real over the short path of feeling temporarily satisfied. Here is the truth that will either liberate you or terrify you, depending on how ready you are to abandon everything you thought you knew about desire, fulfillment, and what it means to be human. You have never actually been seeking another person. You have been seeking yourself. Every face that has captured your imagination, every body that has stirred your longing, Every fantasy that has consumed your attention, all of it has been your psyche desperately trying to show you the parts of your own being that you abandoned so long ago you forgot they ever existed. Jung called this anima projection, the unconscious tendency to see in others the qualities we've disowned in ourselves. But what he discovered goes deeper than psychology. It touches the very core of human existence. You are not broken. You are not addicted. You are not weak or morally compromised. You are a fragmented being who has been unconsciously trying to become whole through the impossible project of finding completion in someone else's body, someone else's attention, someone else's validation. And the reason it never works, the reason that moment of satisfaction always collapses into emptiness, is because you cannot possess what is already yours. Think about the last time you felt truly, deeply attracted to someone. Beneath the physical desire, what were you really drawn to? Was it their confidence? Their freedom? Their ability to feel deeply? Their comfort in their own skin? Their creative expression? Their spiritual presence? Every quality that magnetically pulls you toward another person is actually a disowned aspect of your own potential trying to get your attention. This is why Jung's approach to healing was so revolutionary. He didn't try to eliminate desire. He taught people to follow it back to its source. He understood that lust, in its deepest essence, is the soul's attempt at self-recovery. It's your psyche saying, "There is something magnificent about human existence that you have forgotten, and I will keep showing it to you in others until you remember it lives in you." The ultimate truth is this: what you think of as sexual energy is actually life force itself, the same energy that drives creativity, spiritual awakening, deep love, and authentic self-expression. When this energy is unconscious, it becomes compulsive seeking. When it becomes conscious creation. And the moment you stop trying to get this energy from outside yourself and learn to cultivate it from within, everything changes. But here's the part that will fundamentally shift your entire relationship with desire. The emptiness you've been running from isn't a problem to be solved. It's a sacred space, waiting to be inhabited. Jung called it the transcendent function, the psychological capacity to hold paradox, to be simultaneously empty and full, seeking and satisfied, human and divine. The emptiness isn't your enemy. It's your greatest teacher. Every mystic throughout history has discovered this same truth. The void you fear is actually the womb of creation itself. The Zen masters call it emptiness, not as negation, but as infinite potential. Christian mystics called it the dark night of the soul, not as punishment, but as purification. Jung called it the encounter with the shadow, not as pathology, but as the gateway to individuation. When you stop trying to fill the emptiness and learn to inhabit it consciously, something miraculous happens. You discover that you are not empty. You are space itself, the conscious awareness in which all experience arises and dissolves. You are not the seeking. You are the presence that witnesses the seeking. You are not the craving. You are the stillness that remains when all craving ceases. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the self with a capital S, not the ego that seeks and grasps and performs, but the deeper identity that is already whole, already complete, already at peace with what is. And when you begin to live from this deeper identity, desire doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes conscious, creative, and ultimately sacred. You stop needing others to complete you because you recognize that you are already complete. You stop seeking validation because you discover that your worth was never in question. You stop chasing fantasy because reality becomes infinitely more interesting than any simulation could ever be. You stop running from yourself because you realize that yourself is exactly what you've been seeking all along. And then the most beautiful thing happens. When you no longer need love, you become love. When you no longer seek connection compulsively, you become capable of authentic intimacy. When you stop trying to get life from others, you become a source of life for everyone you meet. The ultimate realization is that lust was never about sex. It was about resurrection, the return to psychological and spiritual wholeness that is your birthright. As a conscious being, every moment of craving was your soul calling you home to yourself. Every empty feeling after was your psyche saying, "This isn't the way. Turn inward, come back to me." So the question isn't how to overcome lust. The question is, Are you ready to stop seeking yourself in others and start finding yourself in the one place you actually exist, in the conscious awareness that you have always been, but temporarily forgot you were? Because once you remember who you actually are, you'll never mistake wanting someone else for wanting to be whole again. You'll recognize that the love you were seeking was the love you are. And from that recognition, everything, your relationships, your creativity, your entire existence, becomes an expression of wholeness rather than a search for it. This is Jung's ultimate gift, the recognition that what we call healing is actually remembering, and what we call desire is actually the force of life itself, calling us back to the truth of what we have always been.